Hello, welcome back to episode 3 of the Future of War Domain Dive. Let's get into it. So, if you're interested in what this class does, please join the Anti-Warfare Warfare Club. We hope to see you all out there. So, today's lesson objectives. First, we're going to understand what the cyberspace, space, and human domain are. Then from there, we'll understand how all the domains will work together. So, what is a domain? A domain is a space that can be accessed and controlled to the benefit of a military. There are 6 recognized domains in warfare, and those domains are land, air, sea, space, cyberspace, and human. We're going to be focusing on these last 3, and we're going to be starting off with the human domain. Arguably, in my opinion, the most important of them all. So, the human domain. There is no specific branch dedicated to the human domain, unfortunately. However, the human domain can be split into strategic and operational psyops. Very similarly, like to the SOT ladder that I taught you. Remember, warfare is organized on 3 different levels: strategic, operational, and tactical. Strategic psyops is psychological operations that's designed to influence decision making and influence human beliefs at the strategic levels. That includes a lot of disinformation, misinformation, influencing the decision making of the people who vote and the people who are in power. Operational psyops revolves around tricking your enemy into thinking that something else is going to happen somewhere else. For example, you trick the enemy into thinking that you're going to attack at location B, but you're actually going to be attacking location A. Things of that nature. So the human domain revolves around being able to influence decision-making skills of both your side or the enemy's side in order to benefit you. So let's go into a very interesting example of strategic psyops. This is a Twitter, or I guess X account, of what seemingly seems to be a pro-Republican Twitter account. And this doesn't seem very innocuous at its face value. It seems like someone's uncle probably runs this account, or maybe you've heard these claims at Thanksgiving dinners before in the past. But essentially, this account was actually not run by a Republican, a person from Tennessee, or even American for that matter. This was actually an account that was run by a group that was linked to the Russian Kremlin. And this account was discovered during the 2016 investigation, post-2016 election investigation into whether or not Russia helped President Trump basically win the election. And the effectiveness of Russian influence efforts at the strategic level are still being debated nowadays, but it is an absolute fact that Russia is continually trying to and definitely benefits from causing a lot of this contentious political discourse. It is from the data and from the research that I've seen that basically dictates the fact that Russia supports Trump being in power. That if Trump somehow gets into power or Trump does something that has everybody out in an outrage, right, and it causes a lot of that toxic political discourse, Russia benefits. There's a quote by Abraham Lincoln that goes, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." I will also reason to go forward that a house divided against itself cannot stand and cannot unite against its enemies. So being able to sow discourse within your enemy's population is a very, very key part of strategic psyops. So while we're on the topic of information, disinformation, misinformation, and throwing claims around and believing in things that may not entirely be true, while we're on the same similar topic to that, we're going to talk about one of the most major disasters in US military history, or the history of the world. And that is the 2003, the second war with Iraq, the invasion of Iraq that ended up destabilizing the country, the region, ended up killing thousands of Iraqis, wasted billions of taxpayer dollars, and basically also killed a lot of US service members and injured them, both physically, psychologically. Honestly, the war was an absolute disaster. It was a waste of time. It is a shameful mark on the reputation of the United States. So, as some of you know the story, George Bush claimed to the entire world that the United States had intelligence that the Iraqi government had weapons of mass destruction, and they also had ties to Al-Qaeda and other terrorist groups. Al-Qaeda is the group that perpetrated the 9/11 attacks that killed 2,500 people and kicked off the war on terror. So, what ended up happening here? Was there some sort of plot to get oil? Was there some sort of Illuminati pulling the strings behind the scenes? In my opinion, and this is just my opinion from what I've seen so far, is that the invasion of Iraq was an outcome of a combination of bad intelligence, groupthink, which is what happens when a bunch of people agree on something that is, even if it's a bad or a good idea, and the fact that if you repeat a lie often enough, it eventually becomes true. I mean, humans have believed a lot less, a lot worse, with little proof. And if governments are made up of humans, then therefore governments will probably be able to make errors just like regular humans do. And so it stands to reason that you must be very, very careful about the information that you consume, the information that you consider as true, the information that you base your beliefs, ideals, and opinions on. Because if worst comes to worst, right? If you're a leader of a government and you decide, okay, let's go invade another country or let's go do something to another country militarily, and you operate off bad information, you are not only going to destabilize regions, but you're going to kill potentially thousands of either your own people or thousands of someone else's people. And that's never good. So please, please, please be skeptical of what you consume. And hell, even be skeptical of what I'm telling you right now as well. Don't believe everything I say at face value. I encourage you all to research everything on your own as well. So with that being said, let's move on into operational psyops. So being able to trick your enemy is very important. Here is an example of deception in action with operational psyops. So here is an inflatable tank that was used as part of a ghost army that tricked the Germans into thinking that, the D-Day invasions were actually going to happen at a place called Pas de Calais in France instead of Normandy. So the Allies set up this huge ghost tank inflatable army. So when German reconnaissance planes flew over, they thought to themselves, oh, shoot, there's a huge Allied army near Pas de Calais. Let me send this information down to Hitler and the generals. Hitler and his generals then agreed that, yeah, the invasion is going to happen at Pas de Calais. So they wasted time and resources defending Pas de Calais when the real operation was actually going to happen in Normandy. And by the time they realized it, it was too late. So, as you can see here, human domain influencing the way decisions are made, right? Influencing the places where you put your military resources, very important. On top of that too, demoralizing, dissuading, or basically getting your enemy to surrender is another big goal of operational psyops. So here's an example of Dunkirk. Some of you may have heard that during the first half of World War II, the Allies basically got their butts kicked. They got outflanked and they got trapped here at this place called Dunkirk. There's an incredible movie by Christopher Nolan, the director, out. It's called Dunkirk as well. And I heavily recommend you guys watch it. So Nazi forces surrounded the Allies on all sides, and they dropped this flyer. This isn't actually the actual flyer. It's a recreation of it, but the information is still pretty accurate, where they basically said, look, here's you. We surround you. There's no point in fighting. That was the implied idea. So just surrender or just survive. So dropping leaflets like this, right? Using propaganda like this to demoralize your enemy really, really helps as well. If you are an Allied soldier and you just saw your army collapse in front of your eyes, and now you're trapped and you have nowhere to go but into the ocean, this would probably be a very convincing argument to surrender. And so this kind of leads into the idea, right, that the human domain, deceiving people, dissuading people, is very, very important. So much so that Sun Tzu, one of the famous Chinese generals, one of the most famous philosophers of all time, who wrote a very famous book called The Art of War, said, all war is based on deception. I would probably go further to this and modify the quote and say, all war is based on the human domain. And the reason why I think the human domain is so important is because that at its core, before any decision about where should I deploy my army, where should we invade, where should we land our Marines happens, the decision to go to war is a major, major, major decision to make. And if you're able to influence that to your own beliefs, to your own objectives, and you're able to influence your enemy to either not go to war or to go to war in the wrong place or to vote for something that isn't good, then congratulations, you have achieved the upper hand militarily without even firing a shot. There's also another quote, also, I probably should put this on screen as well, that the supreme art of war is defeating your enemy without firing a shot. And if you are good at the human domain, you'll be able to do that, no problem. So let's move on to the space domain. What is in space? So the space domain, as the name implies, refers to any type of warfare or action above the Earth's atmosphere in space. Right now, the only space assets we have are satellites. Fortunately, there's no space marines just yet. Just give it a couple more decades. We'll probably have some marines in space. However, the space domain is very important because our satellites are very important. Weapon systems, GPS, intelligence, right? Getting intelligence like images from satellites as well, very, very important to civilians and to the US military. And satellites face a increasingly volatile and lethal threat environment from cyber attacks, from meteorites and other space debris that are floating around the atmosphere, and from anti-satellite missiles. That's about as crazy as it sounds. Anti-satellite, or ASAT for short, are missiles designed to destroy satellites. And the really, really scary part about it is that if these ASAT weapons hit a satellite, destroy it, and break it apart into a million different pieces, those million different pieces are now debris that are going to be orbiting around the globe and could potentially hit and damage other satellites as well. So if warfare ever does come to space and satellites get destroyed and blown apart, it's going to make space travel and launching, recovering, and maintenance of satellites increasingly more difficult moving forward. So the Space Force is responsible for the space domain, relatively new branch that was made in 2020, actually made by Trump, very interestingly enough. And they're responsible for the maintenance, the security, and the deployment of a lot of these satellites, ensuring that the US military and the US government and the US people can take advantage of the satellites in space without having to worry about our access to them being interrupt. And so Space Force responsible for a lot of very interesting space launches. They also have a lot of bases around the United States with these huge little ray domes or domes designed to protect satellite dishes from the elements. And maybe think to yourself, okay, interesting. Has the Space Force done anything cool recently? Besides launching rockets, the Space Force is proving itself to be a very, very capable ally and sister branch to the rest of the US military's branches. So there's an interesting story where during Trump's presidency, he ordered a drone strike against a very famous Iranian general in Iraq. And he ended up killing that Iranian general. And the Iranians retaliated by shooting a bunch of missiles into Iraq. They ended up hitting a bunch of US bases. But luckily enough, the damage was mitigated because the United States Space Force was utilizing their early warning satellites, and they were calling these commanders on the ground saying, hey, guys, incoming missiles, take cover. Even though there were still approximately, last time I read, I believe it was like 100 casualties or so, like 100 people that were injured. There were no people who died. It could have been a lot worse if the Space Force was not giving these bases in Iraq early warning time. So as time goes on, I'm confident that the Space Force will increasingly integrate itself and give itself a reputation for being a reliable partner in times of crisis. So, cyberspace domain. So cyberspace refers to any warfare in cyberspace, anything that's related to hacking, anything that's related to networks, information through the internet. Cyberspace domain and the forces in it primarily are composed of something called cyber forces. So cyber forces are present in almost every single military across the globe. They're basically just teams of very smart guys and girls and people who stay on their computers, and they do their best to ensure that the cyber infrastructure of their militaries and of their people are protected, while also executing offensive actions against enemy cyber infrastructure. So I probably don't have to explain why cyberspace is very important to the human domain, because information is spread along there. Cyberspace is also responsible and is inextricably linked to the space domain, as control of satellites happens through the internet. On top of that, too, any type of communication, any type of advanced weapon system probably has a connection to the internet, connection to other forces as well. So being able to protect those, very, very important, or being able to disrupt those, depending on what side of the coin you fall on. And the interesting thing enough is that the cyberspace domain actually isn't in charge. It doesn't necessarily have a branch that's in charge of it. Instead, we have something called a cyber command. The United States Cyber Command is a combatant command. It's not exactly a branch, but it's kind of like a branch made up of other branches. So the US Cyber Command is made up of different cyber components from different branches. We have US Army Cyber over here, US Navy Cyber, US Marine Corps, and the US Air Forces. They also have their cyber forces all underneath one house for ease of administration and ease of authority. So cyber forces are responsible for doing a lot of very, very important work in cyberspace. A very cool story I want to tell you guys was, I remember one time I went to a seminar, and I later on had a one-on-one conversation with a brigadier general who used to be in charge of US Army cyber. So she was the most powerful woman in terms of US Army cyber warfare capabilities. Very, very intelligent, very awesome woman. She got a really cool job in cybersecurity after she got out of the Army. But she told me this amazing story of how her and US Cyber Command launched this huge cyber campaign against ISIS social media networks. They hacked in, they changed passwords, they deleted accounts, they got intelligence, they were able to kind of unfold and unmask the ISIS cyber operation. If you know anything about ISIS, they are very, very good when it comes to marketing themselves on the internet. That's kind of what makes them so unique against other terrorist groups that are in existence nowadays. And it was really interesting because she also told the story of like during the operation, they were monitoring the chats between these ISIS operatives that were online, and people were getting mad at each other, like, "Oh my God, why did you forget the password? You're such an idiot." And they had a good laugh over that. So, very interesting story about how cyber warfare can interact with things in the real world. So, some interesting examples of cyberspace, human, and space interactions. So, if there's any action in cyberspace, there's a chance that there's still going to be space involved, and vice versa. And so, back in 2014, I believe, this wasn't actually a move done by any US affiliated or US military unit or any other military unit, but a couple of freelance hackers hacked into a bunch of ISIS social media accounts and spread gay erotic material onto these accounts. And yeah, so interesting enough, very funny story. And so the way that this interacts with the cyberspace and space domains, obviously it was an action on the internet. So space, cyberspace are involved. And on top of that too, right, ISIS tries to market itself as a super serious, super lethal, super professional group of terrorists. But if they get hacked and all of a sudden there's a bunch of this nonsense, for lack of a better term, on their networks, then it basically shows people to the world. It sends a message that, look at these guys, they're idiots. We can laugh at them. And when they laugh at them, their legitimacy is diminished. And therefore, that's a beneficial move in the human domain for people who are against ISIS. So that wraps up today's lecture. Hopefully, I'll see you guys all in next week. And hopefully you guys had some interesting things to think about. And I will see you all in class. See ya.